We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's presentation. Thank you for joining us here in person or out in Zoom land. We are happy to have you today. And this was just working a second. So you're here for today's talk. Before we get started, though, I do want to share a little information with you. My name is Melissa Barnett. I'm the director of the Francis McClelland Institute for Children, Youth, and Families, or FMI, as we refer to ourselves. If this is your first event, we hope it won't be your last. We hope you attend. We have our annual Vision Awards ceremony coming up at the end of this month, and then our last Turbeville series for the semester is on November 8th. And we are here in Tucson, and so before we begin, we'd like to share the official land acknowledgement of the University of Arizona, which was developed in partnership with tribal representatives. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. So here at the Francis McClelland Institute, our goal is really to build family resilience by working collaboratively. And we do this by supporting innovative research, actively partnering with community organizations, sharing research findings with practitioners and the community, and educating the next generation of engaged scholars and leaders. All of the work we do is to honor the legacy of Francis McClelland, who was a successful business leader and a very generous philanthropist. Francis lived a life that really exemplified, facilitated, and supported resilience. We are also very grateful to the support of Pamela Turbeville, another very distinguished alum of the Norton School, who continues to support our programs. So finally, the reason you joined us today, we're really excited for this presentation because we're reaching across campus. We, as many of you know, we are a land-grant university. We are in the College of Agriculture, Life, and Environmental Sciences, and we're very much connected to cooperative extension. And so really thinking about how we can extend our reach across the University of Arizona, across the state of Arizona. We can often do this in partnership with cooperative extension. And our speakers today are really going to exemplify how this work can be done. And so this is truly a hybrid presentation. We have two speakers. One is here with us in the room, and the other one is joining us from Tennessee. And so our first presenter will be Dr. Shea Cantu, who is the director of U of A's Community Nutrition Education Program. She is also a state extension specialist and associate professor with the School of Nutritional Science and Wellness. Her research interests include community nutrition education programs, rural poverty, single mothers, adult education, and community sustainability. She was hired at the University of Arizona in July of 2023. And prior to coming to the UA, she worked for Tennessee State University's Cooperative Extension Program. Dr. Cantu earned her doctorate in education and higher learning and adult education from the University of Memphis. But I do think it's worth noting, given how many of you are seated around the table today, that she has her bachelor's degree and her master's degree in child development and family studies, discipline connections. First, we'll hear from Dr. Cantu and then from Dr. Stephanie Grutzmacher, who is an extension specialist and associate professor in the School of Nutrition Sciences and Wellness. Her applied research explores the unique experiences of food insecurity among vulnerable and underserved populations to identify best practices for food safety net and food access programs. Her work engages community collaborators and extension to develop, implement, and evaluate programmatic strategies in a variety of settings to improve the social determinants of health. Prior to joining the UA, she was a professor of public health at Oregon State University and an extension specialist at the University of Maryland. And also share something with many of us in the room, and that she received her PhD in family studies from the University of Maryland. So welcome to both of our speakers. I will ask if you have questions for the first presenter, if you hold them until the end, and then we can take a few minutes for her to address those questions. Then move on to Dr. Grutzmacher, and you can ask her specific questions, but then I'm also hoping that we have time for a general discussion related to the information that both speakers cover. So I will stop sharing. Go ahead, welcome, and go ahead and share your slides.
Okay, can you see the slides and they're in the correct presentation mode?
We can, yes, and we can hear you too.
All right, thank you. It's an honor to be with you today, and I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about our work here in Arizona, especially with our Community Nutrition Education Program for the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension. So I wanted to talk a little bit to begin with about what a land grant is. So as you can see, there are three different kinds of land grant universities. You are on an 1862. So going back to what we were talking about, this is the land grant system in the nation. There are 1862s, you can see those with the red dots. The 1890s, you will see them predominantly in the southeastern United States. Those are historically Black colleges and universities, of which Tennessee State University is one, and where I served for 9 years at Tennessee State. And then the 1994s, you will see them predominantly in the West, and those are our tribal colleges and universities. And so we'll talk a little more about those in just a moment. So the structure of a land grant. So all universities have teaching and research, right? But what makes a land grant is that it has extension. And extension's job is to help local people solve local problems by taking the research of the university back to the people. And you can see that we do these things through several acts. And essentially, extension we call it the Book of Acts. There's several moral acts, the Hatch Act that started the experiment stations, and the Smith-Lever Act of 1914, which essentially started extension. What's important to know is that we are in every county and parish and territory in the nation, and we've been there roughly since 1914. We're to serve people and to help them to help themselves and to learn by doing. We are very much steeped in applied science, or putting people's hands into the learning so that they can apply that into their lives. If you take the first QR code here, it is a Farm Bill year, and they just completed a congressional report on extension. If you want to know more and up-to-date information on our funding and our reach, you can use that QR code. And then in 1922, the second QR code is our creed. And it tells a little bit about the ideals and kind of the things we carry with ourselves to do our work in the community. I'd like to click on those. We do cast a shadow. All of extension and land grants were funded with land that was expropriated from indigenous land. The first moral act was to establish the land grants in every state so that the ordinary citizen could attend higher education, particularly in military science and agriculture, and also home economics was a part of that. However, in the southeastern United States, people of color were not allowed to attend the 1862s. And due to this racial discrimination, they had a second moral act 30 years later that established 18 existing historically Black colleges and universities as land grants. And today there are 19, with Central State in Ohio being the 19th HBCU recently brought into the land grant system. Then in 1994, 100 years later, the Equity and Educational Land Grant Status Act established 35 of what we call TCUs, or tribal colleges and universities, into the land grant system. Both the HBCU and TCUs are significantly underfunded, with TCUs only getting 3% of the 500 million or so extension funding in the nation. And so it's very important to know those things when we start talking about extension and how the land grant system, of which you are a part, came to be. But what I'd like to talk to you also today is about our community nutrition education program, and how we serve community, and how we work with people. It's very important to me that when I have a program that we go out and we build relationship. more important to have a relationship than anything, excuse me, anything else that we do. Today, I would like to, when I was thinking about what I would talk to you about and how you could relate to our work, it is exactly that I wanted to bring to the table, was how do we build relationship with people as professionals in human sciences, child development and family studies, or in nutrition education, or all of the disciplines that encompass family and consumer sciences extension. So the challenges that we face in Arizona is about 1 out of every 9 people are food insecure, and it depends on which county you're looking at. 1 out of 7 children are food insecure. And as you can see, there's a disparity in receiving SNAP benefits or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, and that only about 1 out of every 13 Arizonans receive benefits. Here's where we are in the state. I have 100 employees across the state in both the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program and in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program Education, or SNAP-Ed programs that are in cooperative extension. This is where they're located in the state. The blue stars are SNAP-Ed. We're in 12 counties. And then the FNAP is 6 counties in the red. What you need to know about FNAP is that it's a multi-series class direct education in the community. They tend to reach people at half the poverty line, so well below the poverty line. And we get people through multi-session classes where we help people shop, cook, and eat within their budget. So last year to graduate, they had to get adults through 8 classes, 60 to 90 minutes each, with pre and post test and pre and post 24-hour dietary recalls. And we completed that with 700 adults. SNAP-Ed served about 2,000 youth. FNAP completed a series of 5 sessions with youth, pre and post tested, with almost 700 youth. We do complete about 8,000 nutrition education classes in a community in Arizona last year. We started 34 school gardens. We helped with 35 school policies, enhancing school wellness policies. We improved 34 parks and trails, and we worked with food pantries, roughly about 22 of them in the state. We're building a food pantry volunteer program, so something that we're trying to extend. FNAP's impacts from those multi-session classes: 93% of people improved their diet quality, about 70%, or 7 out of 10, improved their physical activity, and about 86%, which is most important to me, showed improvement in being able to be food secure, to stretch their food dollars. We do things like, along with classes, we build apps and we do mobile markets and things, but Dr. Grutzmacher will be talking to you a little bit more about that. What I would like to turn to is just the nuts and bolts of working in extension, no matter what your program area is, if you're working in community. One of the first things I ever ask anyone in my program is, who is our participants? What is it we're asking them to do? Why should they do it? And what input will they get to give? And often while here is our participants are low resourced, and we're asking them to go to class and they should do it to be healthy, and then they get stumped on the input. But the truth of the matter is, our participants are our neighbors. And what we're asking them to do is to be in relationship with us. And why should they do it? Hopefully, we are showing customer service and neighborliness, and we're offering things that help them in their daily lives, and we are providing social support, all things that we all need right now in our communities. How much input they get to give? Hopefully, they're driving the bus and providing full input into what we're doing. So that's a whole discussion in and of itself. I also often ask, will we be teaching people, or are we going to learn together? Very important that we realize that we learn as much as we teach in extension, and that we are always going to be engaging with lifelong learning in the community. Follow-up contact with participants outside of class. This is one that I have to give permission to all the time, which to me is funny. of 6 or 8 classes or a policy systems environment project or any of those things. You've been embedded in the community 110 years, or hopefully for a millennium more. So of course, you should follow up. You should think that this is long-term. And that generationally, in one family, we can touch many, many generations. That want that relationship. And do we ask people why they're stopping out? You know, they don't drop out, they stop out. Life happens to help inform and improve our programs and our services in the community. Around those conversations, we start talking about who our audience is. In the next slide, I want to show you the poverty guidelines from 2016. It was $11,000 for a family of one, just one person, and you were in poverty. So the 100% is the poverty line, and the 130%, you can get full benefits, whether that's SNAP or that's a reduced lunch, or I'm sorry, free lunch, or any kind of a means-tested federal government program. Between the 130 and the 185, you can get reduced lunch or some SNAP and some reduced benefits. What I want you to look at, though, is how it changed in about 8 years. So if you go to the next, whoops, you can see that we're almost at 6 figures on the poverty line in 8 years. So at 185% for a family of 8. And while this went up $22,000 in 8 years, this only increased by $3,000. And wages are stagnant and cost of living increases and those kinds of things. More people can fall into situational poverty now after COVID. So instead of thinking of those other folks out there when we're trying to look for our audience, I try to explain to my staff in our program that it's us, that these are professional level wages, and that any of us can be a part of our program at any time. So it's not an us and them, it's all of us who can be reached by these programs. And then critical reflection. So the idea that it's not enough to just go out and take action, but you have to think about the action you took and change up what you're doing. And that is essentially practice. And you're in a practice once you're out in the world, in your job. You're never in a perfect. And you should always kind of complete that cycle of take an action, review how it went, correct the course if needed, continue on if it's working, but always, always know that critical reflection is the most important thing that you can do. One example of that is I can't get parents with children to come to classes. We offer childcare, food, and fun games that include the kids. This was an actual quote from one of my educators, and I said, well, did you talk to the parents? It turns out that they were having these fun classes at a time people could not join. So it's an idea of without a relationship, you can do all the things, you can put all the pieces together, but if you really don't see the community as your equal and someone that should be involved in every aspect of your program, you're really not going to get very far. So the reality of the low-income parents that we serve in FNEP in particular is that more often than not, they're single and that is a policy issue, because if you only have one income or a per capita income, you really can't bring home what an average household income would be. So that's a policy issue and not a relationship issue. They're often underemployed, which means multiple jobs, right? Side hustles, those kinds of things. Transportation, and if you can find childcare to begin with, the cost of it, right, is prohibitive. So all of that compounds each other until stress steals initiative. And the other things that you need to think about is, do you know the federal law that currently runs welfare or the welfare state and social safety net in America? If not, it's the Personal Responsibility and Work Reconciliation Act, or PRORA. It was signed in 1996, and it changed out longstanding New Deal era welfare policy. And it made things like welfare checks become block grants from states. And currently, it is very difficult if not almost impossible, to get a welfare check in America. As a matter of fact, many states get in trouble. You'll see it in the newspapers for stockpiling $10F. The other thing that it did was it created time poverty, where you only have 60 months to get an education. You do have to work to receive benefits. It increased issues with stress and what we call the tyranny of the moment in regards to planning. We'll talk about that in a moment. The other is that it critically reflecting on participants' experience of agency. And all that means is, are they autonomous? Do they have freedom? Are we allowed to let the participants lead a program? Tell us what they want to do, help set their own schedule. And we really need to know if we are doing those kinds of things, because that's just honoring the kind of adult education principles that we should be founded on. And so what is their experience of our program? How much voice do they have? And then being able to assess and pay, if necessary, to learn more about how to work with adults in our programs. So how do we remove barriers? So one of the things I wanted to show you was, this is way back in 2003, and it's a study, and it's very much facing the population we serve. And it's showing that the barriers are all on their end. And when I talk to educators, I often begin to hear these same things as barriers to reaching families. But the truth of the matter is that these things are very much not the reason that they're not in our programs. These are. In my 20 years in extension, I found that we have language barriers, that we don't have culturally sensitive curriculum, that it takes funding to build both of those things and bridge communities and cultures, right? But our funding is flat and falling. So then we don't have as many people and not enough programmatic dollars. And so professional development, which is also very expensive and necessary, ongoing professional development, starts to be something that we cannot afford. And then we start talking about how to teach people to go from knowing the information around human development, nutrition, health and wellness, family finance, to doing and implementing programs that help people to actually move the needles in society and in our communities, which is also what Stephanie will be talking to you about today. Then there's a whole block about having to help people see that there's professionalism gets in the way of relationship building, that your title doesn't help you build a relationship, that you really do have to reach out, spend time, and get to know a community. Then there's technology. The issues with both adopting it, keeping up with it, and funding it is a barrier to our participation and to our extension programs. And if you can get through all of that, then you've got to find the bandwidth to have a strategic plan and play a long game instead of a numbers game. These are the true barriers, and none of those go back to the people. These are all issues within our own program that we have to address. So you've all seen Maslow, 1950s, right? So the basic idea of, this takes a lifetime to go from basic to self-actualization, and it takes a lot of resources and a lot of opportunities. And these days, you probably need Wi-Fi to even begin to meet basic needs, which means you need a battery, which starts to be an issue of a cycle of problems that are very, very hard to overcome if you're very much so overwhelmed and stressed. So then the idea is that Satter's hierarchy of food needs, they ask me to move people from not having enough food to being able to move them up essentially into reliable ongoing access to food in 8 lessons. And that's very, very difficult. And so you'll hear more about policy systems and environmental change. But the idea is that while I'm trying to move them from not enough food to reliable ongoing access of food, I'm receiving federal and sometimes national other institutions resources that are up here, not enough to eat fruits and vegetables and whole grains, but now you have to eat quinoa, or you have to do all these extra things. And so it makes it very, very difficult when we have a lot of problems when the local community doesn't have a voice in the information, the curriculum, and the things that we share with them. So that's something that as you move into your career, you have to really think about. Is the curriculum that you're using, are the resources that you have, are they going to resonate with the community you're truly trying to serve? And if they're not, then be willing to look for something that does. And the tyranny at the moment, we've mentioned that a couple of times. So you've seen this before, the stages of change. But the truth of the matter is that those who can really actually change are the ones who least need to do so. That's because they have the most resources. And so really, if you're having to deal with transportation, childcare, food insecurity, all these things, you're running around with your hair on fire. And so how can we give respite and water and not add air and fuel that fire? And so one of the things that we really need to do is to never try to solve other people's problems with our own resources, but meet the community where they are. So strengths-based approach, right? So everyone has passions, admirable character traits. Our community is problem solvers. Then there's deficit thinking, which says that the program is perfect and that people have to change to meet the program. You know, they have to change to comply, and that is never true. The program always, no matter what program you work for, no matter what you're doing, it needs to change to meet the people that it needs to serve. And so very much remember that strengths are much more important than ever looking at your population as though they have a deficit. They do not. And so if we had time, I would get you to work through this, but we do not. But it's very important, even if you're in an academic department, it's very important sometimes to kind of go through your participant life cycle, whether that's students or some other kind of way that you have a participant. But what is the process of successfully completing your program, getting a degree, all those things? What are the behaviors that have to be there for that person to be successful? How long does each of those processes take? And map that out. And then come back later and have a real conversation about what things can you let go of as expectations? What things are absolutely necessary to maintain as expectations? Often we make things too complicated when we can streamline it and have more success and hand success to the people in the community or the people that we serve. So if we have people, how do we keep them? Reasons people stay is a relationship every day, all day. If you can't build relationship, you won't be very successful. Improve skills, being able to reduce role strain. How many of you wear enough hats who could handle having 2 or 3 more roles in their life right now? And if you can't do that, where would you put classes such as ours or extension work into your life if you were going to be a participant? Everyone is that busy, so it's the idea of how do we make our programs help people to handle the roles they've already taken on. Increasing their resources and being able to be a social support. There's a crisis of loneliness now. And then we got to touch on people's passions, see them as volunteers, see them as being able to contribute to our programs, to be our employees, to be our leaders. We need to meet immediate needs, and we need to never start something that we don't have a welcoming orientation where someone gets to set their own goal and we tell them everything that we're expecting for success in the program and all the steps that they'll have to go through. That's very important to keeping people in the community and having them engage with your program. Learning does not have to be like high school, and a lot of people had some really bad experiences in school, so however they learn is just fine. Doesn't have to be a classroom setting. And then reasons they leave. They vote with their feet. If they're not showing up, something's wrong. And they do have the right to reject learning, which we don't tell people enough, that they do, and it's okay to reject learning. We need to make sure that things are applicable to their situation and not try to teach things where they don't have access to, like fresh fruits and vegetables. Sometimes it's wonderful to teach about that, but is there a grocery store? Time poverty issues, not having enough time in their day, or that they're not allowed to contribute their experiences to the learning. And again, having those negative classroom experiences. We know that people are motivated by themselves. They motivate themselves. The kicker is if they're demotivated as adults, they believe that the teacher did it. And so when we're working as Extension, we have to make sure that we're not being the demotivation, that we need to be encouragers, bringing resources and plugging people in to where they can make a difference in their own communities. Of course, building relationships, always, never talking about people who aren't in the room, apologizing, keeping your promises. Doing the opposite will make things very much more difficult for you. And then knowing that no significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. We did study some weak mothers' responses to nutrition education, and what we found was that they wanted materials that were responsive to their interests, to their cultures, had recipes that were of their culture or else were something they were familiar with, that they needed to look at the whole family, and that it needed to have more input from the participants. And they should also be able to have things like shopping and cooking tips within their materials, not just tell people what they need to do, but how to go about doing it. And then having a whole family approach, not just the child, not just the person who comes, but the whole family should be in the program. So at the end of the day, one of the big things about Extension is that we're a lot like the allegory of the long spoons. We go into communities and we help set up systems and we think about things in a way that we help people feed each other. And so I'd like to show you this really quickly. It's 1 minute long, and I think it's very powerful. But one of the things that when you go from the idea of trying to feed yourself, or the idea that, the allegory of the long spoons is you're in hell if you're trying to feed yourself with a spoon in front of a feast that you can't reach your own mouth with. But you're in heaven if you feed each other. And if you can find a community that feeds each other and support those kinds of resources that help grow a sustainable community and a sustainable food system, then that's really the goal of what Extension does and why we go to work every day. Hunger in our communities is real. Children who can't learn, families who are under stress. If you can't feed yourself, you can't take care of any of the other needs you have. And so what we do every day and what we've done for 100 years is a passion of mine. And it's something that if you're interested in, we have a nutrition education conference coming up the 18th and 19th of November, and we're giving stipends for students to come. We still have some spots available. So at the end, if you would like that information, you're welcome to attend. And with that, I will give you over to the lovely Dr. Stephanie Grutzmacher, who I very much admire and appreciate what she's going to tell you a little bit about with policy systems and environmental change and its impact on our community work. So thank you for your time today.
So I am going to talk a little bit about the research outreach connection, like how research that comes from institutions informs the practice and informs programs like what Shea administers, SNAP-Ed, FNAP, and other community nutrition programs. So the kind of justification for looking at that is really the fact that so many social and economic and environmental factors like shape our health opportunities and shape people's access to food, they shape the affordability of food. And traditionally, Extension has worked in really direct education in the way that Shea talked about, and direct education remains very important. But in the last 10 to 12 years or so as well, Extension has started to shift towards strategies that focus on policy systems and environment to kind of acknowledge the fact that so many of these factors really shape people's opportunity. It's not just about like, oh, I don't know how to eat healthy. It's that, even when I want to, there's all of these barriers in place, and we need to work at a different level to be able to address some of those barriers. So Extension is embracing PSE work, and this all kind of started I used to work with SNAP-Ed a lot back when I was at University of Maryland, and Kate did as well. And we would put things in the SNAP-Ed proposal that were policy systems and environment things and send it to the USDA, and they would reject it. And they said things like, you can't work with food service staff at schools because they're not your SNAP eligible audience. First of all, that's delusional about what food service workers get paid. I don't know where that came from, but they wanted people to work with the end audience, like the target audience. They didn't want people working with change agents. They didn't want people working with people who could facilitate these kinds of environmental and policy changes. And that changed about 10 years ago. There was a person who had a public health background who was in California SNAP-Ed, and he wrote this SNAP-Ed evaluation framework that really emphasized work in PSE, and everybody just kind of suddenly went along with it, and then everything changed. It was kind of a strange, in my perspective, kind of a strange thing that happened, but it's great. So now PSE work is a really prominent part of extension. A lot of people focus on these types of strategies for their work. There have been some growing pains in those shifts as well, but there is now a national framework for health equity and well-being that also centers like health equity as an outcome. And I'll talk more about the connection between PSE and health equity in a second. By the way, there's going to be a lot of theory in here for those of you who are like, why do I have to learn theory? Like Shea had some things, like I have some things. I was kind of surprised because I'm not really a big theory fan, but there's stuff in here. Little nuggets or Easter eggs, as the kids say these days. Yeah. So these research extension collaborations can help identify like what should we be doing in the field? Like what are some of the upstream and midstream approaches that are appropriate? How can we identify opportunities and barriers in communities and in states to be able to address those kinds of things? We can like free up people's opportunities to pursue health or to have health for themselves and their families. And my particular area of focus is in food access and food assistance. And so I'm paying attention to how can we make healthy foods, fresh fruits and vegetables and other things more affordable for people, more accessible, more available basically. So I don't know if you've seen this. Everybody here knows Bronfenbrenner, yeah? Like you can apply that to everything. That's super important. Really relevant to PSE work, and it's clear to see how that applies. So this is a little bit different application. This is kind of like a Bronfenbrenner sort of thing, but applied to health. It's the health impact pyramid. And it kind of shows how in the blue pyramid, it talks about basically like what levels of intervention can you have, starting from counseling and sort of direct education all the way down to shifting socioeconomic factors that influence people's health opportunities. And the idea is really that you can have a really dramatic, really transformative impact in a one-on-one or a direct education relationship. You can change somebody's life with those kinds of things. People's lives can be changed by, a dietitian or a therapist or a counselor or in an educational setting. But that in the societal view, that has a relatively small impact. We have to reach people in these really intensive ways to be able to make change. And the idea of the health impact pyramid is basically that, if we work farther down to the bottom, we can make larger impacts to larger groups of people by sort of preventing the health risks and other risks that people experience that create these adverse outcomes for them. So examples would be, like I mentioned, dietitian, counseling, like advising people to eat healthy. That's great. It's going to be great for some people. It's super important. But that we could put some of our energy towards trying to address policies and food environments and things like that to be able to make these broader changes. We haven't quite gotten to the point where we can agree on shifting the socioeconomic factors that sort of create these challenges in the first place, all the inequalities based on people's identities, ascribed identities, and things like that. But we're working more upstream to be able to address these environments. So speaking of upstream, I'm not sure if people are familiar with this parable, but I guess this is another sort of theoretical thing. The example I hear the most is kids floating down the river. I don't know why, that seems so weird, but anyway, people at the bottom of the river, there's kids floating down the river, they save them all, they pluck them out, and then finally they ask, why are all these kids in the river? And they go upstream and something needs to happen where they're falling in. And so the solution to all that is we need to put some kind of barrier there to keep the kids from falling in the river. So that's an example of the upstream intervention. It's so strange. But essentially, the idea is that we're changing these environments to create more positive social conditions for everybody so we can have health for all. And that includes people who are underserved and marginalized in a much greater way than some of the other strategies that we've used in the past. Our main approach to health in the United States is really paying for expensive late-stage tertiary care in healthcare settings. We spend a fortune doing that, and we're now getting around to realizing that if we can modify risk behaviors, or if we can sort of prevent the conditions that create risk behaviors in the first place, we have a lot better chance of achieving health equity and positive health outcomes for everybody. So to break that down a little bit, I really love this graphic. There's going to be other stuff that pops up in a second. But basically, the idea is that individual health education, direct education, addresses risk behaviors. It addresses poor dietary quality. It may be able to address food security if we can teach people more about food resource management. We can talk about, not smoking and not engaging in other risky behaviors. And those types of interventions can prevent, disease and can prevent poor outcomes like early mortality. But it's a pretty incomplete picture. This is what our society is broadly focused on right now. We love like the second one there, because there's money to be made there. But we really have to back all the way up to the top of the river where the kids are being chucked in, I guess, and talk about the social inequities based on those ascribed identities, class, race, ethnicity, et cetera, and how institutions, kind of perpetuate some of those inequalities. But the essential part here for policy systems and environment, and for extension, and for land-grant institutions, I think, is this living conditions piece. So the idea is that living conditions, your environment, your social environment, your physical environment, those things shape risk behaviors. So it's not inevitable that somebody smokes. It's not inevitable that somebody has, a poor nutrition environment. These are things that are shaped by social determinants of health. So if we can put energy into social determinants, we can, in a cost-effective way, prevent risk behaviors in the first place and reduce the need that we have for a lot of those direct interventions, counseling, et cetera. So we are very keen to zoom in now on health disparities that manifest in this later part of this model, the downstream piece, but we have to really focus on the inequities that drive those things if we want to have a chance of really reducing them. So that's just diving in to make sure we're kind of on the same page about things. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of research studies that I've done in the last couple of years. I'm new at U of A, so I have nothing, I'm empty-handed for U of A related work. It takes years to do the kind of work I do, soup to nuts. So I'm just let's talk about things I did in the past. And I'll talk a little bit about how some of those have shaped extension interventions, and also talk a little bit about some of the projects that I've worked on and done evaluation for that have also been attempts at midstream, probably not quite upstream, but midstream strategies to improve food environments. So I'm going to talk about 3 studies. I'm going to dive into one of these in a little bit more detail if I have time, and then I'll talk about the projects. So I've done a couple of different studies with farmers and farm workers about their experiences with SNAP and food assistance, like food pantries and things like that. Learned a lot about their perceptions on those things, and also in some communities, one of the communities where we did data collection, there are some changes happening now through the extension office in those counties directly related to the results of this research. So we learned that people had stigmatizing experiences when they went to apply for SNAP or use a food pantry. People were unkind to them or treated them in a way that felt indignified to them. They felt that the food assistance programs weren't relevant to them. They weren't providing culturally preferred foods. They weren't really acknowledging. So a lot of farm workers, this is in Oregon, by the way, a lot of farm workers in Oregon live there year round. So there aren't as many migrant farm workers. And so people really are very much enmeshed in their communities there. But they felt like they didn't recognize a super obvious fact, which is that farm work is seasonal and things are harder for people in the winter when they don't have as much work. And so they just felt like food pantries didn't get their circumstances. A lot of people told us that they would use food pantries 20 years ago and they hadn't been back because of these experiences. And the food pantries, one of the reasons we actually did this research is because the food pantries were I don't get it. Nobody's coming to use our stuff. It's really great. We have all these fruits and vegetables. We have amazing things. We have Christmas baskets and sort of these winter programs and all this stuff. Nobody knew about it and nobody used it. And so one of the takeaways was that the pantries and the food bank needed to develop messages that would aim to kind of replace people's perceptions from their earlier experiences so that they might give the pantry another shot. Another thing that people talked about was that they'd rather just take care of themselves, and they wished that some of the barriers to that would just be gone. So as one example, a lot of farm workers are really great at growing things. They know a lot about growing things. And they used to, in this community, they used to have space at one of the healthcare centers that served this population. They used to have space to garden. It was a community garden, you could get your plots and stuff. And then they expanded the healthcare clinic and all of that went away. So a lot of people told us, like, we really just wish we had a place where we could grow things, but we live in this farm worker housing. It's all like these kind of densely co-located apartments and stuff like that. And we can't really do this. And so the extension folks who work there, having learned this through the study, they're now working on securing community garden space to engage the farmers and farm workers in that area. And also helping people have conversations with the landowners, like the farm owners, about maybe saving some space at their facilities to be able to do the same type of thing. The older adult study, I'm going to skip for a second and then talk about the college students instead, because I'm going to dive deeper into the older adults, hopefully. So the college student piece I worked on with Tim and Kate, actually, and we were curious about what colleges and universities were doing across the country to address student food insecurity. And so many colleges are using food pantries as a response to that. That might be great, but we actually have like no evaluation information about what's effective to address college student food insecurity. So this is a situation where the action has, sincerely come before information about what might be effective for students. Students aren't eligible for SNAP typically, but SNAP might be, working on SNAP policy and student eligibility for SNAP might be a really fabulous way to be able to address food insecurity. But we did this study just to see what everybody was doing and found like what the common strategies were. And that work is underway, but we're hoping to use that at some point to really shape like how colleges and universities are responding to those kinds of challenges. So the takeaway from that is like applied research can be really helpful. You should consider doing it someday. I want to talk about, I think I'm going to skip the first three of these. I'll tell you lightly about them, but then skip them for purposes of time. These three projects, the first three here are all from my time at University of Maryland, SNAP Ed. So this is during our transition to PSE work, but like in addition to direct education. We had a classroom-based SNAP Ed program called Refresh, and it was just kind of a typical elementary level nutrition education program. And then finally, we were approved to work in cafeterias. We worked with food service staff to change the environment, to promote fruit and vegetable consumption. We taught them how to do prompts with kids to get kids to choose fruits and vegetables with their lunches. We did lots of other things to kind of make the environment like conducive to eating fruits and vegetables. So that was kind of like a PSE layer on top of a traditional direct ed. We also did a Text to Be Healthy program, which just got sunsetted after 10 years of text, and we had a little sad exchange about, well, also happy because it was really hard, about that program. So it ran for 10 years. The reason that we did that program is because we were doing SNAP Ed, Nutrition Ed, Direct Ed in schools, and then realizing that it's kind of falling apart at home. Like there was no way to kind of get parents to take, the recipe out of the backpack or like kind of otherwise engage in what was happening in the schools. So kids were having these great hands-on experiences, tasting foods, gardening, all kinds of other things, but there was sort of like a missing piece. And it's impossible for the reasons that Shea described to get parents to show up to like a nutrition ed class in the evening. Like that's a nutty thing to ask of people. Any of you who have children are like, yeah, no, thank you. Nothing extra until they're 25. So we decided like to reach parents on their cell phones. We designed a text message program that, to be super specific, really exploited the information that we knew about people. We knew their elementary schools, so we also knew the grocery stores that were nearby. We knew what activities were going on in the community. We knew where there was safe recreational opportunities nearby. And so we were able to write these tailored text messages to people to send them information that was action-oriented to be able to kind of reinforce the key things that were happening in the classroom at all these schools around the state. So eventually we had thousands upon thousands of participants, a bunch of different schools, and all of this like messaging going out to kind of give people a thoughtfully timed, like quick action kind of nugget that they could do to eat more fruits and vegetables with their kids, get physical activity, etc. I'm doing poorly here, aren't I? Yeah. I'll also tell you about Double Up Food Bucks. When I worked for SNAP Ed, I found myself getting frustrated a lot at even with the PSE level work. I just thought if people had more money and food were more affordable, we wouldn't be doing all of these things. It seems so simple, but also so impossible to shift. And Double Up Food Bucks has like restored my energy for this kind of work because it literally gives SNAP participants money to spend on fruits and vegetables. Like, finally, yes, thank you. So I'm the evaluator for the Double Up Food Bucks program in Oregon. Have people heard of Double Up Food Bucks in Arizona? Yeah. A little bit, not everybody, okay. So Double Up Food Bucks is a program for SNAP participants usually, and participating retailers like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, grocery stores. You spend your SNAP dollars and you either get, the models differ from state to state, but you either get a 50% discount basically on all the fruits and vegetables that you buy, or it's like spend 20, get 20, and you get like a voucher for future fruits and vegetables. Just depends on the environment. So I've been working on evaluating that program to make sure that it's, you know, responsive to people's circumstances, that it is also helpful for stakeholders. There's lots of people who can benefit from that program besides SNAP participants, farmers, growers, market managers, you know, grocery store owners. Like there's just really it's a multi-stakeholder kind of program because it also promotes like local food consumption, fresh food consumption. And so there's a lot of people who can benefit besides the folks who are increasing, doubling their purchasing power for fruits and vegetables. That's my timer that I set.
That's okay. So yeah, you can go ahead and
okay, yeah, really quickly. So what we're doing to evaluate, this is what we've done, and we're still doing more things to evaluate this program. But we have participant surveys every summer. We measure food insecurity, fruit and vegetable consumption, and kind of the length of participation as a proxy for basically, we can't do multi-point in time data collection, and so we know how long they've been in there, and we sort of compare, this is my first day people to less than 6 month people to more than 6 month people to try to approximate what change might be for long-term participation. We also have done a bunch of qualitative participant interviews and stakeholder interviews just to find out like what's going on, how is this working for you, how does it benefit you, how could it be better? And we've learned a lot about this, but I have to say, like, the best thing about the program, according to everyone, is like, thanks for the $20. Like, it's so simple. And right now, this is funded by the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program through the USDA. And it's a competitive grant program. So every 2 years, people that have a Double Up Food Bucks or related type of program, they have to apply for money, grant money. They have to win the grant money and to keep the program going. The hope is that in a future farm bill, this will be funded as a permanent kind of add-on to SNAP. And part of the value of the evaluation that I've been doing and that everyone else who has a SNAP Ed or GusNet program is doing is to be able to say, like, this is so valuable, please fund this for everybody. That's the idea. I'm not working on that, but there's people at the national level who are like aggregating all the evaluation from all around the country, all the GusNet grantees, to be able to say, like, can you guys please just make this a real thing for everyone? Thank you very much. So there's a policy layer here that aims to, if you can't decrease the price of fruits and vegetables like wholly and universally, can you at least allow low-income shoppers better access and better purchasing power so that they can actually implement the things that they're learning in direct education programs through extension. Okay, I'll stop there so we have time for conversation.
Yeah, you can keep, if you want to.
Let's talk.
Okay.
How often do they get the $20? Like once a month?
It depends. So in Oregon, you could show up every day at the grocery store if you wanted to, just like different transactions. Farmers markets obviously are usually only open 1 day a week. You could go around to different markets if you wanted to. And the real cap on that is like how you choose to allocate your SNAP dollars. So if you wanted to go bonkers and spend all your SNAP dollars, you could continually get match in our program. And we do, I think the number now is about $2.5 million worth of match every year that we're spending in the state. And so it's not unlimited technically, but you could use it pretty maximally. You could spend all your SNAP dollars that way if you wanted. That doesn't seem to be what people really do. you know, they might take the 20 and go with it because going to the store might be a hassle. Like these are small retailers, usually like co-ops and stuff like that, for our grocery program. The markets, we have about 65 markets now participating, so those are a little bit more accessible if you're in one of the kind of more populated areas. But if you're not, your opportunities to spend that money kind of over and over might be more limited.
And that was in Oregon, so is the $20 program, like, is that in other states or just the state?
Yeah, it depends. So the Arizona one is $20 too, right? Yeah,
Yes.
okay, yeah.
Similar, but similar?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And you, if any of you were using SNAP, you can use it at you can do Double Up Food Box in Tucson at a bunch of different places. You can look online and see what retailers participate, but you can also use it at Plaza Mobile Market and Tucson Village Farm, which are both extension programs. So like you can see how in Arizona through Double Up Food Bucks, like we're connecting to those like kind of PSE level things by facilitating those opportunities for people to get food.
What's the frequency of the $20? Is it like $20 for like a one-time, I don't know, membership to the SNAP, or is it like something that you use monthly? What is it?
You can do it over and over and over.
Okay.
So if you had $150 on your SNAP card, you could theoretically, throughout the month, you could take that to any participating place and just match 20 over and over and over until you get to 140. Most people don't spend their SNAP dollars that way because they can get more at a large grocer on not fruits and vegetables. So this is more of like a side bonus, I think, for how people tend to shop. But I mean, you could do that if you wanted to. You could spend the whole thing and just go crazy.
Right. The reason I asked is because like I don't know, I guess the frequency, like really, you have to take into account how often people use it, and I don't know. I was just wondering about how do you combat like the inflation aspect of it? Only because I know the whole scale is like why can't we just print more money if we're in debt?
Yeah.
And like the depletion of the value of money like in the U.S. I understand that whole thing. So if the program were to get like really big and it I don't know, it was able to touch a lot of families and like really become a really big thing in America, how would we, I don't know, kind of combat this inflation aspect of like, hey, we're just giving people more money for these families, and then the prices are going up. I know it depends on the state, but yeah, what would happen if like?
I have no idea. Is there an economist, Kate? You have thought about that?
I would argue that that's preventing other health things, so it's actually saving money down the line from like having to pay for diabetes care, heart attack.
Yeah, if you think about if you give somebody $20 a day to buy fresh fruit and veggies versus the end cost of chronic diseases they may get. But I mean, you
Yeah,
definitely have
it's
to think
real.
about too, it's like, it's great to be able to spend $20 a day on fresh fruits and veggies, but they have limited lifespan. Like if you think about other things that you can buy at the store
Yeah.
with your
More cheaply. Yeah.
whole grains, dried beans that can last a little bit longer and still are nutrient dense.
Yeah.
So there's a
And right now too, just to point out, like it's not funny money. It looks like funny money,
Yeah.
like the little card, but it's real dollars. Like USDA is like sending that money to the grantees. The grantees are like reimbursing everybody for that stuff. So it's like real, it's real. And if all SNAP, I mean, I think SNAP serves about 1/7 of the population. Somebody can correct me if that's wrong, but it's ballpark-ish. So it's not like super universal. And I think, you know, like you said, like people would choose to spend it more judiciously than it seems, because fresh fruit is perishable. It's often a risk for low-income families to buy fresh food because of, you know, storage and like, are my kids gonna like it? And what am I gonna do with this? And it's unfamiliar. Like there's so many other kinds of barriers to using like a really large volume of fruits and vegetables that I don't think that people would spend 100% of their SNAP dollars just to get that double bonus. I think they just spend quite a bit more lightly on fruits and vegetables than that.
And I'll just add that people are sharing some resources in the chat. And so, for example, the website to find Double Up Arizona here and some of the vendors that participate. And so we can, when we share the video of this, we share a transcript, we can include some of those resources in it as well.
So how is $20 identified as the amount?
I don't know. It used to be 10 and then they put more money in it and now it's 20. I don't know how that worked, but I have a quote in my presentation that I skipped over of somebody talking about when it was $10, how it was too much of a hassle to actually use it, and it wasn't worth it to them, like driving to the store and like going to a special store or going to a special farmer's market. And so someone out there, I'm sure, was like, $10 is not enough, and they probably did some studies somewhere. There's actually some really sophisticated evaluation and researchers connected to like the national GusNIP programming. There's a whole technical assistance center at the University of Nebraska that like works on all these really fancy studies. They may very well, I'm not aware of it, but they may very well have said like $10 isn't enough. But our participants have said that, and we tried to study that change when we went from 10 to 20 and just say like, what, you know, what's going on? And people said like the $10 was okay, but like I didn't use it frequently, or there was hassle connected to it. But the $20 is amazing, and I'm going to go out of my way to show up to spend this money.
I'll also, sorry, add too from the chat, Shea shared that there's also a WIC and senior voucher program for farmers markets along with the double up bucks. So again, other nutrition security programs using the same kind of approach.
Yeah, and they're great. And I will say also that they really confuse people. So there's like 8 kinds of currency that you can use at a farmer's market now if you're eligible for these programs. It's like, okay, I got my WIC check, I've got my my double up, my SNAP, and then my double up, and then can I use my debit card and my credit card and cash? Like you can use like 500 things to pay for food at the market now. And there's a little bit of like lack of cohesion across those programs. And so vendors and participants alike are like, about all the different things. And they have different rules about what foods you can buy and stuff like that too. So we've created some complexity in trying to serve specific populations that actually in some cases end up overlapping, and they're the same population, and then there's just confusion over like what you can buy with what things.
I was just curious to know, with programs like the ones that you've been talking about, or just other extension programs in general, are there ever efforts to connect with other like mutual aid community focused groups? Like I know in Tucson there's a Community on Wheels, and they work a lot to, specifically with like our unhoused neighbors, giving them water and snacks and things like that. So I'm just curious like what the connections are, or like if there's ever any like bridges that are made between these programs and like more community organized mutual aid.
Yeah. Shea, do you want to take that?
I can. So yes, we work very much in coalition with a lot of different groups across the state and the nation to bring out and kind of align the resources that are available. In the conference that's happening on the 18th and the 19th of November, we're having a couple of panels. One of them is with statewide partners and local partners about food security in Arizona. We're also bringing in some folks to talk about our underserved communities who are from and live in underserved communities, and how they are working to address some of their issues around food accessibility and building out sustainability for their communities. So those are 2 panels that will be happening at the conference, but day to day, we work very much like the Garden Kitchen is embedded in South Tucson, and it works very much with local folks there to meet the needs. Like Plaza is something that came out of the Garden Kitchen that's a mobile food market that goes to the Valencia Library. So there's another connection there. They buy their produce from a refugee farmer's market or a producer, and they buy it at cost, and they sell at Plaza for 50% of what they bought it for. And then they take double up bucks. They worked with Pinnacle Prevention and some others to make sure, and it was very difficult to get through the university, but now we accept SNAP benefits and double up bucks and things like that in extension, and so does Tucson Village Farms. And then you go and we have 5 tribal extension programs, and in all of those we work with building community gardens and trying to make sure that we can find ways to bring water and just different things there. So across the nation, not just in Arizona, on the ground every day, Extension is trying to take disparate resources and pull them together, and just like in the video, help people to kind of, feed each other. And so there's a place for a big part of this extension that we haven't touched on is civics. There's a lot of what we do is a lot of community civic work. And so just getting people to come to the table. And we do that by taking a very apolitical, very much research-based and very much embedded in the community stance. And that helps us to build trust. And that's something that's taken a long time for us to build. And we're very, very cognizant that it would be very easy to lose that trust. So the most important resource we have is that connection we have in the communities we're in.
And I would add to that too, that Extension is trying harder to serve as a, like, what we would call like a backbone organization, like a stable organization that has sort of stable stable resources. That seems like a joke right now, but you know, that an organization that can drive like coalition and bring lots of partners to the table and figure out together like what can we do and who plays what role in all of this effort. So if we have common goals like improving health equity and well-being, like who's sitting there and who can kind of bite off different pieces of a strategy that communities can agree on. So I think a lot of times people say, why haven't I heard of Extension before? It's like, we're not branding ourselves as much as we are like working in coalition and communities so that other agencies can deliver services and programs and like be in relationship with communities. And we're just trying to like sometimes steer, other times support, other times inform the activities that are going on in those organizations and groups of organizations.
An example of that working across nutrition into health and wellness is the EXCITE program. So they had a bridge access. EXCITE is adult immunization, particularly COVID for the bridge immunization program. And so they went to FNEP. FNEP is 55 years old and fully funded for Extension. Is the nation's oldest nutrition education program. And they asked all of the coordinators to take a little bit of extra funds and bring in immunization information into the classes, right? And so we did across the nation. And we, like I said, we touched some of the most vulnerable of our community members. And in 3 months, when the first quarter report came out, we had given out information and provided resources to 2 million people in 3 months. And so that's the reach of the U.S. Cooperative Extension System. And we are in the territories, we're in every parish, we're in every county. We do 4-H work, we do human development, we do health and wellness, nutrition education, family finances. Of course, we have ag, we do workforce development, we do natural resource conservation and tribal extension. And so we love and enjoy what we do. It's a calling. But we can definitely, we do bring, and the federal government and other entities see that we have the reach and the reach and the years into the communities, that we actually are a trusted resource that would take them too much time to build. If they wanted to come in with a message, they don't have the time to turn it around. And that's one of the backbones of Extension, like Stephanie was saying, that we are that organization that we will roll out and work with anyone, as long as we know they're not going to hurt the community, to bring out, you know, research-based information and make lives better.
We are at time now. Thank you both so much for coming today and sharing this work, and hopefully some people sitting around the table or out virtually are thinking of ways that the work that you're doing and the work that Extension is doing connects to their own work, and really think about ways to move forward together. So thank you so much. Thank you.